The Newsagents.
Well, first of all, can I reassure the honourable gentleman that I am not about to defect to the opposition benches. They wouldn't be interested in me. I'm too left-wing.
That was Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the Commons. Now, normally, when you lose one of your MPs, you feel sullen, chippy, irritated, insecure at what has happened. But the Tories seem to be strangely cock-a-hoop, whereas Labour, who should be gloating and glowing, are feeling kind of uncomfortable about their new arrival from Dover.
It was such a shock to see Natalie Elphicke, the Tory Dover MP, cross the floor just before Prime Minister's questions. And when I say shock, I don't just mean for us, I mean for the Labour Party as a whole. So today we're going to give you a bit more reaction from the Labour Parliamentary Party, who are still scratching their heads about what on earth Keir Stamer has just done. Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And we're going to try really, really hard not to swear today because we got told off by Vicky. Vicky, I am so sorry that there was no bad language warning at the front of the podcast, and your kids apparently were rather gleeful that we were being a little bit loose with our language. Also, the Shadow Chancellor as well, I should say, Rachel Reeves.
I think more of the bad language over the last 24 hours has probably come from parts of the Labour benches, including the Labour frontbenchers in parts, who were just trying to work out whether this was a masterstroke or a massive own goal on the part of Keir Stamer. And I guess to put the plus side for what he's done, you know, this was sold to me by a shadow minister who said, look, last night the TV news bulletins were leading on millions of people hearing a message that Labour is stronger on borders and defence than the Tories and that the Tory party is falling apart. No need for gimmicks like mugs or bad policy or far-fetched rhetoric, just a simple and credible message from an extraordinary message carrier. I think extraordinary message carrier is probably one of the nicer things that Natalie Elphicke will be called today. So I can see how if you just want that amazing headline, somebody to tell, you know, the evening bulletins that Labour is now the place for defence and borders, you've encapsulated it in that one moment. But I do think the ramifications for this will not go away because she touches on so many issues that so many in her new party find deeply unpalatable. Her response to female victims of sexual assault, her response to workers who were fired at P&O, her response to kids' families who remember Marcus Rashford as the hero who got the school dinners round, and actually who are still asking questions about how on earth she took over her husband's parliamentary seat in a process which was, let's just say, not remotely transparent.
So the headlines would have been everything that you would dream of on a day one. You know, we used to talk about budgets delivered by chancellors where on day one they look absolutely fantastic, and then something comes unpicked.
The Cornish pasty.
The Cornish pasty, and it all starts to unravel and becomes an omni-shambles. And I'm not saying this is going to follow that trajectory, but what looked like the shiniest, ta-da, too clever by half surprise at 12 o'clock yesterday afternoon when Natalie Elphicke takes her seat behind Keir Stamer, and everyone goes, oh my God, what's just happened here? I think with the passing of time, it will come to look a little bit weirder. So we were both at a thing last night, a speech given by the former Foreign Secretary, David Miliband. And I was speaking to someone who had worked very closely with Blair in the run-up to 97, when, of course, they were trying to woo Rupert Murdoch. They were trying to win over the Daily Mail. They were trying to win over disaffected Tories. And the thing that this guy said to me was, he said, be careful what you wish for and be careful who you wish for. And I thought there was something very salutary in that, like, whoa. I mean, Natalie Elphicke is a complicated person to be welcoming on to the Labour benches, even if she's only going to be an MP for the next 6 weeks. I was looking back to when a former Tory minister resigned before the 97 election, a guy called Alan Howarth, who'd been the MP for Stratford-upon-Avon. And he defects to Labour, but there was an 8-week quarantine period before he could take the Labour whip.
Before you could take your rabies with you.
Yeah, exactly. And you just wonder whether Labour's current chief whip is wishing there was an 8-week quarantine period to see whether we think this is a wise thing to happen or not. Because I'm thinking that there are an awful lot of Labour MPs who are kind of thinking, are we sure about this?
I agree. And I think for a party that has constantly castigated the Prime Minister for performative politics, this was a gimmick. This was performative. They have no love for Natalie Elphicke. She has delivered one message on one night, and I think they'll probably cast her adrift after that. And you can either say, well, we got what we wanted out of it, or else you can say, that's really cynical and it's sort of the worst kind of politics.
Yeah, she had been a member of the ERG. She'd been a member of the right-wing campaigning group, the European Research Group, which was on the extreme Brexiteer wing of the Conservative Party.
And she wants to take the country out of the European Convention on Human Rights. Normally, you have to dig really hard to find the sort of, the policy dirt that makes it quite a bad fit. With Natalie Elphicke, it's all out there. I mean, it's absolutely out there, baking in the sun for anyone to see.
Well, that was something else that was said to me by someone else I spoke to last night, was that Keir Stamer wants to show, I am ambitious, I am going to win, nothing is going to stop me, I will do whatever is necessary. If this gives me a few days good headlines of Labour looking electable, and if you just think about the Penny Mordaunt clip, I mean,
that's what
perfect.
Yeah, you can't pay for that.
If you want to reassure Conservatives that the Labour Party under Keir Starmer is a safe space, Penny Mordaunt has done the heavy lifting for you.
Penny Mordaunt used the same voice that she used when she described Liz Truss as not hiding under a desk. She has that sort of same lilt, which suggests she knows she's going to be quite funny.
Yeah. Quite funny. Yeah. But I don't think Labour MPs are laughing. I think Labour MPs, Labour activists will be feeling deeply uncomfortable about it.
Well, actually, he's allowed them to say, what about Diane Abbott? What about Jeremy Corbyn? All these questions now feel absolutely valid and justified. What about, if Jeremy Corbyn wanted to join the Tory party, what would Rishi Sunak say? I mean, would he go?
No, thanks.
I think so.
And if we were to have played a game 2 days ago and said, Natalie Elphicke is going to defect, where is she going to defect to? Yeah. Is it going to be reform? Or is it going to be the Labour Party? I think both of us would have said reform.
Yeah,
she'll be joining Lee
lost
Anderson.
Money if we, yeah.
And surprise, surprise, she's joined the Labour Party. Although
actually, reform is a really good fit, isn't it?
Well, I mean, given some of the past things she's said and been part of the ERG, but on immigration, actually, she has been more nuanced, hasn't she? In fairness to Natalie Elphicke, that she has talked about the importance of the role that diplomacy plays in all of this.
Yeah,
and it's not just a question of pushing back the boats and just stopping the boats like that. I think she understood that the gimmick of just stopping boats in itself is not going to cure the problem.
Well, yeah, okay, yes. I mean, she has been on the front line. Dover, as we know, is one of the places where most of the small boats will land. So presumably she knows better than anyone the kind of tragedies that are unfolding on their beaches there. What she has said is Rishi Sunak's not got a grip on this, and she has talked about David Cameron having the right approach to diplomacy, i.e. working better with the French, working better with European neighbours to solve it. But that doesn't really sit well then with being a very arch Brexiteer who clearly was going to throw diplomacy up in the air to get what we thought of as our own sovereignty and not work with countries on this issue primarily. And it also doesn't square with wanting to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. I don't think there is enough consistency to say, oh, she has a cunning plan here and she's going to share it with Keir Starmer. I'm not sure that's where we're at.
Well, hang on. We've got some breaking news, actually, from Natalie Elphicke. A statement has just been issued which says, and I'll read it out, the period of 2017 to 2020 was an incredibly stressful and difficult one for me as I learned more about the person I thought I knew. And this is obviously about her husband. I know it was far harder for the women who had to relive their experiences and give evidence against him. I have previously and do condemn his behaviour towards other women and towards me. It was right that he was prosecuted, and I'm sorry for the comments that I made about his victims. And that follows the well, he was a good looking guy, that's what happens. We're joined in the studio now by Baroness Chakrabarti.
Shami
Chakrabarti. I was just giving you the full title.
Thank you.
I wonder whether you feel that statement goes some way to reassuring.
It does go some way, and it doesn't surprise me. And There was obviously more to there was always going to be more to her story than the comments made at the time, and I guess she sadly won't be the first or the last woman to have defended her husband in a way that subsequently proved to be indefensible.
Oh, come on, Shami, this is a bit of a show, isn't it? I mean, when you look at what she said at the time...
Yeah, I mean...
When you look at not just what she said, but how she basically said that he had been dragged through the mud because women were playing dirty politics.
Yeah.
When she then went to take his seat, we don't even understand the mechanism by which she then took over his parliamentary seat.
Yeah.
That was never transparent. And she hasn't apologised for... coming on for 6 years, and then the day after there's, headlines about it. Somebody from Labour clearly pushed her out there and went, apologise, send a breaking text, send a news alert.
Do you know what I really think should happen? And maybe it should have happened as a preference to the irresistibly dramatic coup of PMQs. Maybe the better approach would have been, and could still be, for her, for example, to do a broadcast interview with, for example, a trusted neutral journalist who isn't going to bully her and shout over her, but is going to ask difficult questions and give her the opportunity to answer them. I have to believe, it's in my nature, it's what I believe, that people are capable of changing their minds and changing their hearts, not just about, the crimes of their loved ones, but about
Natalie Elphicke
politics.
that we heard from on Tuesday of this week, that Keir Stamer was failing on defence and borders and all the rest of it, has somehow had this Damascene conversion.
I don't know.
You're laughing, right? In 48 hours.
I don't know. I have to believe that some conversations have been going on between Natalie Elphicke and the leadership of the Labour Party, and I want to hear more about her journey. That's the way I would put it. That's the way I would put it.
I just want to come at this from slightly the other end. You just said something along the lines, well, it would have been rather better, rather than having that big dramatic moment, if someone had interviewed her, da-da-da-da-da. You think the Labour leadership have mishandled this?
I think
the word you're clutching for is yes.
Yes, but it's not too late. I don't believe in this zero-sum game, in the politics of personal destruction. What I really want to say is, if there is room in the Parliamentary Labour Party for a changed Natalie Elphicke, bring back Diane Abbott today.
And presumably Jeremy Corbyn, who's also been suspended.
Well, if he wants to, if he wants to come out, and look,
he does.
Well, absolutely. But I choose.
So you'd be happy to have Corbyn back?
Of course. Look, if we're talking about big tents, then a big tent has more than one corner, or a broad church has at least 2 walls, probably 4 walls.
How big is your tent? I mean, is there any sort of Rubicon that you wouldn't cross? Is there anyone in the Conservative Party?
Of course.
Who?
Look, the values that I hold most dear are the values of rights, freedoms, and the rule of law that I happen to have written a book about. But you know that is where I come from. That is my journey.
So your book is called, let's bring it in, Human Rights: The Case for the Defence. And your party has just welcomed in a woman who thinks we should be leaving the ECHR, and who...
Well, that's why I'm interested in hearing more from her. I really want to know. I'm not prepared to set myself up as judge and jury over somebody who's not even going to be standing as a candidate, as I understand it, at the next election. So in a sense, she's voted with her feet. She's going to be voting Labour at the next election.
But in a sense, Shami, dare I say, this is not really about Natalie Elphicke. It's about the Labour leader's judgment on this one, whether he's actually going for gimmicks, whether he's going for headlines, whether he's going for performative politics, because it puts a smile on everyone's face to surprise everyone for half an hour, on a Wednesday lunchtime in the House of Commons.
Well, that's why I say the proof will be in the pudding. And in a sense, it's for you and your colleagues to test the pudding when the interviews and the in-depth conversations happen.
For the pudding to come in and do an interview. That would be great.
But why not? I mean, why not?
But Shami, look, you speak to these people all the time. You're in touch with the Labour Leadership Office. You're in touch with all sorts of people, the Whip's office. I mean, what is the reaction? What is the feeling? Tell us what the feeling is in the Parliamentary Labour Party now.
Well, some people, look, we know that some people are surprised and some people have been upset.
Surprise sounds a very neutral word. Okay,
let me quote Neil Kinnock. I'm just a member of the parish, and he was a former leader of the church, right? And he says we've got to pick and choose. Even a broad church has its limits. So I suspect that his position will be reflected by a lot of people in the Parliamentary Labour Party. What I say is, I want to hear what the change is. I want to hear from Natalie Elphicke. We've heard her speak. She's issued a statement about the remarks that she made and the things that she did in relation to her ex-husband. I want to hear more about the politics of this. I want to know, does she really want to walk out of the ECHR? I'm assuming she said that in the past. What does she say now? She says that Rishi Sunak has not actually been tough on stopping the boats. And I think she's right about that. I don't want desperate people to have to get into unseaworthy vessels. I want them to have safe routes to come and claim asylum in the UK. What does she say about that now? What is the conversation? Okay. What is the journey?
Well, I'll tell you. She said that she thinks that diplomacy should be used to help solve the immigration crisis.
Well, she's right about that.
But she voted for a very hard Brexit, which made diplomacy with our European neighbours much, much harder. I mean, it's the political equivalent of Russell Brand getting baptised in the Thames, isn't it? I guess what I'm saying is,
it is surprising.
It beggars belief that people in the Labour Party should suddenly be sitting here saying, "Oh, give her a chance. I'm sure she's very, very changed nowadays."
Well, I don't know. I just want to hear. I'm just not prepared to damn this woman until I've heard her tell her story about why it is that she's changed her mind.
But as things stand, she should not be in the Labour Party until you get that clarification.
No, I'm not saying that, because apart from anything else, when you're trying to win an election, you are asking people who have voted Conservative, some of them for many years, to change their minds. You are trying to make common cause with them. You are trying to persuade them. That is the business of democratic mass movement politics, because I'm not Elon Musk. I don't wield power and influence because of my millions and billions of pounds or dollars. So the way that you do mass movement democratic politics is you try to reach out and you try to change people's minds. However, I agree with you, there have to be some red lines. There have to be some values. If you take the previous defection last week, Dan Poulter, I pretty much cheered that one, because I know from having made common cause with him during the pandemic that he supported the TRIPS waiver that would have allowed the global south to be vaccinated in numbers, and it would have saved many, many lives during the pandemic.
He didn't have this reaction. What do you think it was about her 17% chance of winning her seat at the next election that first made her?
Well, look, sure, but at the same time, I understand she's not seeking to stand again, which puts her in a way a bit more like an ordinary member or a voter. Now, look, I don't think it's not the best handling. I think the interview approach would have been better than the show-stopping.
Has anyone had that conversation with Keir Stamer? Have you?
I haven't, but I suspect other people have. It's certainly been reflected in some of the punditry and the even the left-leaning commentary this morning. I mean, as I say, my priority is, okay, so a changed Natalie Elphicke is now welcome in the Labour Party. What about my friend Diane Abbott, who served the Labour Party
saying Diane,
her whole...
You don't say Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I feel particularly strongly about Diane. She is my absolute priority today. But the point you make, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn or, if you're building a broad church, you measure the breadth of that church from one wall to the other.
You're talking about human rights.
Yep.
Keir Starmer's made it very clear that the Rwanda policy would end.
Yep.
He's talked about the need to rework or rethink our relationships with France. Is the unspoken bit now that we are going to have much closer ties with Europe again to solve the immigration crisis?
I think it's unspoken, spoken, logical, inevitable.
It isn't spoken.
Well, I'm saying that I believe we have to have closer ties with not just our nearest neighbours, but at the international level too, to cope humanely and effectively with the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. We also, and I suggest this in my book, need to have more internationalism, not more nationalism, if we're going to cope with the other big challenges that we face on the planet today, namely AI, war and climate emergency. And therefore, it is particularly baffling to me that my fellow children of migrants, Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman and so on, want to turn inwards, want to pull up the drawbridges, want to rip up values and conventions that their previous generation of Conservatives, actually, as much as anybody else, worked so hard to achieve in that special moment after World War II.
Are you comfortable saying that about children of immigrants? I mean, do you feel that they haven't talked particularly about their immigrant past?
Oh, they do invoke their parents. Both Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak have invoked.
I guess they can choose how they.
We all get to invoke our journey. The reason why I think it's relevant, by the way, and I'm not saying that anybody should be judged more or less harshly because of who their parents are. The reason why I think it's relevant is this. Some people know better. When I see the antipathy towards vulnerable minorities, in particular refugees, I think a lot of it comes from ignorance and fear. But when you have been, like me, the child of migrants, you know better. Because you sat around your dinner table and your kitchen table with your parents. They experienced racism, you experienced racism. You know better. Ignorance is no defence there, and that's why it breaks my heart. I'm just disappointed. I'm just so disappointed that these very highly educated fellow Britons who have benefited from internationalism so much, not least in their educations, they went to places like the Sorbonne and Stanford University, and the product of that brilliant elite internationalist education is pull up the drawbridge, pull out of the ECHR. I find it really sad and disappointing.
I want to ask you about the meeting that is taking place between the Prime Minister and Vice Chancellors about anti-Semitism on campuses. A lot of Jews who are students, the Union of Jewish Students, feel they're a vulnerable minority at the moment.
I totally understand that. And it's always really, really dangerous to be blaming, whether it's blaming British Muslims after 9/11 or blaming Jewish students because of what I believe to be a disproportionate and counterproductive and inhumane response by Mr Netanyahu after the atrocity that was October the 7th. That's always a danger, and it's absolutely wrong. But I would also point out that there are a lot of Jewish students and Jewish people who have been demonstrating against a disproportionate response in Gaza too. So a lot. So let's not ever think that any community is totally speaking as one.
Though. I mean, I'm sure you're not, but you can't elide the Jewish people who are part of those protests with the anti-Semitism that students are feeling on the campus. You can't assume that.
No. What I'm saying is, it is anti-Semitic to blame somebody for a decision by Mr Netanyahu just because they're Jewish. But it is also a prejudice to assume that there aren't many Jewish people who are involved in these protests as well. And the crucial thing is universities owe a duty of care to all their students. And I would say, in respect and in solidarity with students who want to protest, that they have a responsibility too to take care of their fellow students and to demonstrate their values.
Does that mean shutting them down if they think they're getting out of hand?
Well, no, of course. If somebody is putting their fellow students in fear, if they are abusing them, then they must be dealt with, and they must be dealt with initially.
And what about just the intimidatory nature of protests? Well, protests outside a synagogue or protests on the campus.
Well, I think. So the example of protests outside a synagogue, I think that is inappropriate. Because why should a synagogue is not an embassy? A synagogue is not an institution of any state. The thing about the right to protest is it's not an absolute right. It's a vital right in any democracy, but it can be subject to limitations to protect the vulnerable, to protect other people. There's an element of proportionality and common sense that in the first instance, people have to exercise ethically and morally, because human rights aren't just about laws. They govern our ethics and our behaviour ourselves. And what I want from the student movement and protest movements is for them to be their better selves and to demonstrate their values even as they protest.
Shami Chakrabarti, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The whole world is holding its breath right now to see if those anticipated first signs of a ceasefire that we were hearing about on Sunday night could ever turn into something real between Israel and Gaza. And last night we had news that President Biden had warned Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu that he would halt supplies of heavy bombs and artillery shells if Israel did choose to go ahead with a military invasion of Rafah. He said, this is Biden, I'm not providing the weapons. It is the clearest sign yet, it is the most simple of language yet, that there is a line that Netanyahu cannot cross militarily, and that America, it seems, is prepared to put its money where its mouth is and say no more arms to Israel if Rafah is bombed.
And you can't exaggerate what a moment this is, because since the foundation of the State of Israel in 1948, it has been bipartisan policy in the United States that the one democracy in the Middle East, namely Israel, will be supported by the US. So for the US president to stand up and say, we're not going to supply weapons, is quite a moment. Now, it needs contextualising. There's more nuance to it than that, because, of course, Israel's right to self-defence, America is still supporting. So reinforcements for the Iron Dome missile defence system, yes, that's all fine.
I mean, that was all part of the $96 billion package that Congress signed off last month.
But as you say, these 2,000-pound bombs, the artillery shells that were apparently on their way to Israel are being halted for the time being. But it's also led to a political row in Washington. No surprise there. But Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, Republican and very Trumpian in a lot of ways, has been working quite closely with the administration on getting this aid package to Israel. And he has said he was assured the day before by senior administration officials in this confidential call, which he had to take in what they call a SCIF, a secure compartmentalised information facility, that there was no change in policy, that the weapons were going to be supplied. And he said, 24 hours ago, it was confirmed to me by a top administration official that the policy's no different than what we thought it was. So I hope it's not a senior moment by Joe Biden. That's what Mike Johnson has said.
Because Joe Biden made these comments in an interview. He doesn't do that many interviews. So it is possible that he wanted to sound stronger within the context of an interview than maybe he had to, those around him or those across the aisle in other language.
Well, you judge for yourself whether you think this is a senior moment or not by Biden. This is him speaking to Erin Burnett from CNN.
I want to ask you about something happening as we sit here and speak, and that, of course, is Israel is striking Rafah. I know that you have paused, Mr. President, shipments of 2,000-pound U.S. bombs to Israel due to concern that they could be used in any offensive on Rafah. Have those bombs, those powerful 2,000-pound bombs, been used to kill civilians in Gaza?
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah. Artillery shells.
I mean, it's quite slow, it's very softly spoken, but I think the language is clear there. It is quite wrong. We're not going to supply them, right? So that is a change of policy.
It has also brought Benjamin Netanyahu to say, look, you know what? We'll go it alone if we have to. And he has reposted on Twitter or X today a bit of a speech he made where he is restating that.
In the Holocaust, the Jewish people were totally defenseless against those who sought our destruction. No nation came to our aid. Today, we again confront enemies bent on our destruction. I say to the leaders of the world, No amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone, because countless decent people around the world support our just cause.
And I'm sure that Netanyahu believes that firmly, that Israel will stand alone in the world, and he and his, small coterie within the Israeli government are not going to bend. I think increasingly, though, many Israelis, many people who want to be friends of Israel, don't want to see Israel go it alone. They do want to see Israel forging those alliances, retaining those alliances with America, with a democratic president, with international law. They don't want to think of their government as being so isolated that it hasn't got any friends left.
So you've got Netanyahu in a coalition with extreme right-wing nationalists, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, the two ministers who are kind of saying, we've got to go into Rafah, we've got to have total victory over Hamas, doesn't matter what the costs are, that's what we have to do to secure Israel's safety. You have Biden and the power of the United States of America, and no Israeli, very few Israelis would think, fine, we'll go it alone. If America don't want to be with us, we've got this covered.
And you've got all the hostage families who increasingly just want their government to start thinking about the hostages first and not about the destruction of parts of Gaza that should never really have been on the list in the first place.
The choice that Netanyahu has not wanted to confront is staring him in the face now. He's either going to have to bow to the right-wing nationalists in his government who could bring him down and force a general election, which has all sorts of other consequences for Benjamin Netanyahu.
As in court cases
and corruption charges.
Right.
Or he goes the other way and alienates the United States of America.
And I guess at the risk of a massive screeching handbrake turn, we should try and extend what's going on and the sense of isolation to a cultural event that's taking place this weekend, the Eurovision Song Contest, where the Israeli entry, and traditionally, Israel takes the Eurovision really seriously, even if many of you listeners out there do not.
Emily Maitlis takes it extremely seriously.
I live in a family of people who are not allowed to speak during the songs.
I have been to your house during a Eurovision Song Contest.
It's quite painful in many ways. Anyway, Israel, several-time winner of the contest, and they've hosted it pretty recently, are now finding their own entry facing criticism from many people in Europe who don't want to see Israel taking part this year. The song, we should just put this in context, is sung by a woman who is evoking October the 7th. And the tragedy that happened to Israel at that time. She's not explicit. It's not about Hamas. It's not about Gaza. It's not even about Israel in terms of the lyrics per se. But it's clearly the sentiment of what happened to the country that day. And there are people who think she shouldn't be there, that she shouldn't be singing about that side of war, who don't want to see Israel take part.
Well, I think the song was originally called October Rain. It's now called Hurricane, and there is no mention of October or October the 7th in the song. But there are, in some of the lyrics, it talks about how the moon, will never
be the same again, and how boys will cry, and
exactly.
It's a reference to the soldiers and presumably the rapes and the killings and the massacres that took place at that music festival.
But the uncomfortable bit about it is, of course, that 2 years ago, Ukraine comes along in the wake of the invasion by Russia, and everyone is cheering Ukraine. Israel comes along when it was subject, you can argue the toss on this, but the attack hadn't been provoked by any specific event. You could talk about years of occupation maybe having led to it, but it was kind of October the 7th came out of a clear sky when 1,200, 1,500 people are killed, 100 taken hostages, that suddenly no one is cheering for Israel for raising this. And it shows the depth of the isolation of Israel.
I also think it raises questions about whether we think we should be punishing artists or tennis players or footballers or citizens for performing with the name of their country when they are fundamentally artists and singers and football players and tennis players. I mean, I would say at this point that Russia was banned from the Eurovision in 2022, and it seemed like, to many people, the right response at the time. I mean, actually looking back at that, I think that was wrong, because I think we understand that Putin is an autocrat dictator who has positioned himself on the Russian people. I think there are loads of people in Russia who would be so happy to see the back of Putin, not least the parents of the soldiers who are now being conscripted to fight in a war that they never signed up to. So I think really the whole premise of banning countries' citizens from this has got to be wrong, hasn't it?
Well, cultural boycotts do seem to have an effect. There was a long-standing cultural boycott of South Africa.
You don't think Netanyahu's quaking in his boots saying, I don't mind Biden, but if the Eurovision's coming at us, I'll change my mind on Rafa.
Of course, look, the realpolitik of it is he's much more worried about Joe Biden than he is about Eurovision. But Eurovision has been a useful place for Israel to kind of project an image of kind of liberal. You look at Dianne International, and that was a
trans artist.
First trans artist. It was progressive.
Winner.
It was modern,
she actually
liberal.
won the whole thing.
It was, the projection of liberal democracy in a funny kind of way, and what an open society Israel was. Yeah. So I think it does have soft power for Israel, and therefore to find that your singer, I just feel sorry for the young woman Eden Galan, that she is going through this and having, she had her rehearsals and there were people booing her. And I don't think that you can blame her for what happened. I mean, she's not responsible for what happened on October the 7th or for what the Israeli army has done since then.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget how many people in Israel are vehemently against their own government, as we saw before October the 7th, all through the summer of 2023, when they were on the streets protesting against Netanyahu and his policies.
So we were invited to a speech being given today by the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron. And the speech was being delivered at the National Cyber Security Centre. We couldn't go because we were recording the podcasts, but the journalists who did were told that the security code for the doors is 1234. At the National Cyber Security Centre.
Not password, then?
No, not password. That's probably the code for the Wi-Fi.
Yes, exactly. Password 1.
You cannot make this stuff up. I'm sorry.
This is in the week of the MOD hack, where hundreds of thousands of names were released or hacked because of a failure of security. In the week that you're actually trying to keep MOD hacking off the front pages, you make 1234 your password.
Yeah. Anyway, we will be back tomorrow. The passcode.
No, don't tell them when or where. No, you have to find out. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.